The Fault in My Heart Part 1. I thought by drinking and partying my life away, I would be able to stop being numb. That I would stop feeling as if the world owed me something. But when all that was gone the next day, I was faced with the cold, hard truth. I was depressed, going nowhere, and there was nothing that could get me to stop. My mother had passed away when I was in middle school, but if she was alive, maybe I would have never fallen into such a deep hole. My father was a good man, maybe too gentle towards me, and I rebelled against him at every chance that I got. I left home when I was 19 years old and went out into the big bad world. I had not seen him once since then. He made sure that my credit card still worked and checked up on me every now and then, but the relationship was strained. When I found out that he was terminally ill and had been for over a year, I was gutted. For the first time in years, I wanted to go and see him. We might have had our differences, but he was my last living relative. We did not have an extended family that I knew of, and my father had never remarried after my mother. I got a call from the hospital one morning while I was nursing a hangover, informing me that he had collapsed. I could not believe that I had not noticed that he was sick for such a long time. I felt guilty and decided to book the next flight back home. I was getting tired of the city that I was in. For many years, I had lost myself in substance, many lovers, and more cities that I could count. It was much better in those places. I was accepted for who I was, unlike in my town where I had become an outcast because I was gay. And what had been my father's response? To try to protect me by asking me to tone it down. I had chosen to leave rather than pretend to be someone I was not. He was not homophobic, but he did not care too much about keeping the peace. By the next day, I was on a flight back home, and I had not been notified that my father had been discharged. But he had a nurse to attend to him at home, which was a relief because I did not know how severe his illness was. I arrived in town after a long trip, and it looked very different from the last time I had been here. 5 years had gone by, but it felt like it had been double the time. Many places that I remembered had either been demolished or renovated. When I got home, Mrs. Finkel was there to welcome me. She had been taking care of the house even before I was born. She had already made some food for me and ran a bath for me, but I wanted to see my father before anything else. "Dear, he is sleeping at the moment. Why don't you visit him once you freshen up?" she suggested. I agreed as I knew that there was no arguing with her. She fussed over me and how I had lost weight, as she had always done when I was younger, and I could not help the feeling of nostalgia that washed over me. Once I had eaten and taken a nice long bath, I went to my father's room to see him. He looked like he had aged decades since the last time that I saw him. He was much frailer than the man I remembered. I touched his hand and sat beside him, wondering what I was going to say when he finally woke up. When he opened his eyes, they lit up when they landed on me. "My son, finally, you have come back." His voice was weak but filled with emotion. I could not help it. I hugged him tightly. I tried my hardest not to let all the emotions that I was feeling made me start crying. "Sorry, who are you?" "Mr. Ray cannot have any visitors today," a male voice said. I jumped away in surprise and turned to the door. There was a male nurse, holding a tray with a bowl of some other things on it. His face was in the shadow, so I did not see. "I'm sorry, I just got here, and I needed to see him," I said. "Only family is allowed at this point, and his son is overseas," the man said as he stepped closer. The first thing that I noticed was his different colored eyes, the result of heterochromia. He locked eyes with me and then the tray hit the ground. I rushed to help him out immediately, but the soup was not salvageable. "Oh well, there's not much that can be done now. Do not hurt yourself with the charts," I said. There was something familiar about him, especially his eyes, but the person I was thinking about looked nothing like that man. He had been a bit skinnier when we were kids and did not have a beard. "Francis," the nurse said, looking at me with shock and nothing else that was intense. I felt a wave of anger wash over me as everything fell into place. He was more toned now, with a bit of a beard, but there was no mistaking one of the people I despised the most in this town. Reggie. Before I could think of anything to say though, my father groaned from the bed. The both of us rushed at his side at that moment. "You have to leave, he might need his pain meds," Reggie said. I left. But I was so close to having an outburst. I'd never felt anything passionate for anyone in my life, but with Reggie, the passion I felt threatened to burst me open. I hated him with everything that was in me, Even the sight of him made me physically ill. I wondered how the hell he had been assigned to my father, but I was not going to have it, no matter what. I started pacing up and down the hallway as I waited for him to get out of my father's room. I don't know how he managed to trick my father into hiring him, but his days taking care of my dad were over. Mrs. Finkel was just passing through at that moment, and I called for her. She took one look at me, and a look of realization came over her face. "It has been many years, Francis. He is a good guy, and he has been taking good care of your father," she protested. "You were there so many years ago. You know what happened between us? How could you allow him to take care of my father?" I asked. "I did what was best for his health. He is a good person. You were both so young back then. Do not let this interfere with their father's health. I beg you," she said. "I want him out. I will hire someone else," I said in dismissive tone. She sighed and continued heading to her destination. As soon as he came out, I grabbed him and pushed him against the wall. "You!" I growled. "Francis!" He smirked darkly. I could never forget those eyes, no matter where I went in the world. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I asked. "Working. Let me go. I need to prepare your father's bath," he said through gritted teeth. I could see that he was just upset as I was, and that spurred me on. I wanted to fight him right then. That would help me relieve the tension I had. "No," I spoke. He pushed me back, causing me to hit the wall hard. "You are fired. Get out," I screamed. "Gladly," he said as he straightened his uniform, turned on his heel, and left. I stood there alone, breathing heavily for a while. I decided I needed a drink due to the way that I was so upset. I went to my father's study and opened his liquor cabinet. I poured myself a drink and downed it within seconds. I relaxed a bit as I felt a warm sensation in my belly I got at my first sip. Then I slowed down soon after as I did not want to get wasted. I still needed to arrange for someone to look after my father. While I was thinking about that, Mrs. Finkel entered the room with a stormy expression on her face. "Are you mad? Your father put me in charge of this place. You do not do the hiring and firing. I do," she said. A bit of fear went through me, but I stood my ground. "I did not want to undermine you, but I do not want him here. You can hire anyone else," I said. "It is time you let go of that bad blood. You might find that you have more in common with him than you think," she said. "Like?" I asked. "He has also struggled to be accepted in his community as you did," she said. "Why?" I asked. "Everyone liked him when I left." "He is gay, like you. He came out when he came back from nursing school. He has had a hard time fitting in. He reminds me so much of you," she said. I admit it did tug at my heart a bit that he was not accepted for who he was, like I had been when I was staying here. But that did not change the past. "I want nothing to do with him. Find someone to hire in his place, please," I added. She gave me a disappointed look, but she agreed. The next morning, a new nurse came to attend to my father. I had not expected my dad to have grown attached to him, though. I would not say that he was upset with me when I told him that Reggie would no longer be taking care of him. But something changed. But I knew my dad. He would get over it soon, and Reggie would fade into a mere memory. Even though he had refused to fade from mine. But the new nurse made a lot of mistakes, and Mrs. Fickle had to correct her many times. On top of that, I caught her talking on her phone when she was supposed to be attending to my dad many times. At the end of the day, I asked Mrs. Finkel to get someone else. As the days passed, we changed his nurses, but he did not seem to get along with any of them, and many of them did not understand his needs. Mrs. Finkel kept on saying that Reggie had taken care of him for the past year, and he had done a good job. I was forced to rethink the hasty decision that I had made on the first day. Even though I despised Reggie, my father's health was something I would not compromise on. There were so many regrets I had, so many questions I had for him, and I was not prepared to lose him yet. I was forced to swallow my pride and ask Reggie to come back. I hated humbling myself in front of the man I hated the most, but I had to do all I could for my father. Already, I had failed to notice that he had been unwell for over a year. I asked Mrs. Finkel to ask him to come to the house, as I knew he would never come if I was the one who was calling him. "Do you want to blame me for something else?" was the first thing that came out of his mouth. "You were guilty in the past, not today. I'm here not to talk about our past. I need you to come back to work," I said. "You threw me out like a dog." His eyes had always been defiant. One of the things I secretly admired about him I will double your salary. Only you know my father's full medical history and how to take care of him. I fear his final days are looming and I want to prolong them as much as I can. Please." My voice had taken on a weaker tone, and I had to stop talking before I started crying. Despite everything that had happened between me and my dad, I still love him. "Fine, I will come back, but only for his sake. He is a good man," he finally said. "Thank you," I said, turning to leave. I would endure seeing his face every day just so my dad would be comfortable. We had been talking more lately about the past. Our conversations helped me to realize how I had taken him for granted for a very long time. He had always made sure that I had everything that I wanted. And I guess from that, I became a bit entitled. He had wanted to protect me from the backward-minded people in the town, even though protection was not what I wanted. I could no longer hold anything against him, especially now that I did not know how long he had. Having Reggie in the house was a thorn in my backside. For the first few days, we were civil towards each other, but we did clash several times, especially when it came to my father. Even though he was a professional, I still knew what was best for my dad. There were so many incidents where we had arguments that nearly turned ugly. Sometimes it was not even about my father. Even a simple conversation between us could lead to an argument. I did not know why, but he brought out something in me that I did not know existed. I had been involved with many guys when I was still traveling, but no one managed to make me feel so rife with life and passion. He excited me, even though he annoyed me at the same time. I failed to understand how he could have so much over me when I had put so many guys under my spell before. But never had I fallen in love or in hate as I was with him. Why did it matter? I would soon learn to live with him. One morning I was doing some paperwork in my father's office because everything had been left a mess. In the year after I finished high school, my dad had taken me under his wing. So I knew everything about his deals, investments, etc. Despite the way things had changed since the last time I saw them. Just as I was busy with a very long document, someone knocked on my door. I tried my hardest not to groan when I saw him there, with a tray. "Did you get lost?" I said, then I coughed. I had not been feeling well all morning. I suspected it had something to do with the changing of the season. "I brought you a concoction. I noticed that you were not feeling well. I had some leftovers since your father is not taking in much today," he said, looking down almost shyly, but there was no way that he was shy. "Why are you helping me? I'm fine," I said as I got back to work. I heard him let out a loud sigh, then he made his way over to me. "I do not care if you want me to. I am the nurse here. I cannot have you feeling sick. If your father catches it, he will become worse. Or you can refuse to let me help you feel better. Then I will not let you anywhere near him until you feel better. It is your choice," he said in a no-nonsense voice. Fine, I gave in and started to drink whatever he had prepared. It stank, and it did not taste good in the least. I could not help but make a face. He laughed for the first time in my presence. He had a nice laugh. Very hearty would be the way to describe it. I started laughing as well. I guess it was infectious. "Thank you," I said. "I'm only doing my job, making sure that your father gets better," he smiled. Just then, I heard a voice screaming both our names. I got up immediately, racing with him to the door. We made our way to my father's room immediately. We bumped into Mrs. Finkel, who was mumbling so fast I could barely understand anything that she was saying. "Ma'am, I need you to be direct. What is going on?" he said. "He wanted to get up. Even though I protested, I told him to wait for you. He started turning red and then he fell on his bed. I quickly rushed here. I do not know if he's okay or not," she managed to let out. "I will call the ambulance. Go and check on him," I said. He nodded as he rushed to my father's room. I barely registered what I said on the call. I was too shocked to even use my mind. I could not lose another parent. I could not be left alone. They arrived a few minutes later and put him on a stretcher. Reggie got in him in the ambulance. I followed in the car with Mrs. Finkel. I had so much to say to him. If only I had not been away for 5 whole years. To be continued. Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos like this. And as always, stay wholesome.